Good evening and welcome to Perspectives in Discourse 2017. This evening, evening session will address the topic of Is There Life After Death? Our guest speaker for this evening is Dr. William Guy. Between 2001 and 2008, Dr. William Guy was the Director of Mental Health Services at Botsford Continuing Care in Farmington Hills, Michigan. As the sole psychiatrist for the facility, he assessed hundreds of cases of patient near-death experiences. Prior to getting his MD from University of Michigan, he obtained his PhD from Wayne State University in experimental pathology with doctoral minors in clinical biochemistry and in pharmacology. He has worked as a consultant in psychopharmacology, or as a consultant, for some reason I keep stumbling over that, worked as a consultant in psychopharmacology for many pharmaceutical companies and continues to act as such. In his near-death presentations, he discusses the difficulties with the theory that near-death experiences are a byproduct of a distressed and dying organic brain. I have had the pleasure of speaking to and getting to know Dr. Guy over the past 6 months to a year, and I can personally tell you that he brings not only an expertise to the podium, but also a passion that helps you fully consider the different options that might exist concerning topics as complex as is there life after death. That being said, I will not delay any further, but I will present to you Dr. William Guy.
Thank you very much. All right. Well, welcome everybody. I'm here to discuss the existence of life after death, the evidence that life after death is something real for humans. As a psychiatrist, this is a topic that comes up quite a bit. It comes up in patients who are coming to my office because of significant depression, because of the loss of a loved one. It comes up when my patients come in and they scare me with talk of suicide. Okay? That's the worst thing that can happen to a psychiatrist is when people kill themselves. I really hate that. And I've had a few of those in my over 20-year career, and I remember every one of them. And I always think to myself, did I have a chance to talk about this with them first? If I've discussed this life after death stuff, I haven't had anybody commit suicide once I discuss this. People see suicide as an escape. And I want to say it's not an escape. You do go on. I don't say that because of faith so much. Well, it is faith, but for me, it's conviction. I believe it with every fiber of my being. The evidence is overwhelming. I don't have time to go through all the evidence. There's so much. I can literally talk nonstop for about 24 hours, giving you story after story after story that has led to this overwhelming conviction that I have. Now, some of you saw my earlier presentation, so I want to say something a little bit different. I want to open up with a story that you haven't heard yet. Okay, I just thought of it while I was sitting here, and I have a discussion with you. Okay, a colleague of mine, a cardiologist, told me about a case that he had, which I thought was really cool. All right, he treated this little girl. She had a septal defect that was pretty pronounced at birth. And she wasn't big enough to do surgery, and so they waited till she was about 3 or 4 years old before they went in and corrected the defect. So surgery went okay, but after this little kid came out of surgery, she kept talking about going to heaven and sitting on Jesus' lap and talking to God. Now, that's not weird, because kids have near-death experiences all the time. That's not unusual at all. Children have near-death experiences, actually to a slighter, greater rate than adults do. What was weird was that she kept talking about it. 5, 6, 7, 10, 12 years old, this girl is still talking about something that happened when she was 3 or 4. Okay? Never left her mind. Now, in the surgeries, she was given a pacemaker because her sinoatrial node was pretty much whacked. So she had a pacemaker, and as she grew, she had to get different ones because to fit her new heart, right? So that was her life. She lived a pretty normal life. Now, like normal, I guess by today's standards, because her parents did get a divorce, it followed the her older sister actually overdosed on drugs, and she died. And the death of her older sister is pretty much contributed to the divorce of her parents. Well, anyway, she grows up, goes to school, meets her husband in college. He's a lawyer, and starts a young law practice. She has her first child. Everything's going fine, right? Then one day, she's sitting in her kitchen at home, taking care of the kid. The kid's in the bedroom there, and all of a sudden, in walks her dead sister. She said that she walked in just as fresh as you please, dressed like she normally did, looking exactly the way she did when she was around 16 when she killed herself. Okay, and she was surprised, obviously, to see her dead sister show up. And she basically came in and says, "Hey, sis, how you doing? I just came to tell you that it's time. Your time is up." And when she said that, the patient goes, it's like, it was a little bit of a surprise, but actually instead of filling her with dread, she was excited. She never forgot what it felt like to be on the other side. And it was a tremendous comfort to her when her sister told her that. And so she sat down at the table with her, and they talked a little bit. And she didn't go into a whole lot of details as to what the discussions were, but after a short time, she simply wasn't there anymore. And so she sat there in the kitchen thinking, what does this mean? It's my time. Clearly, I'm going to go pretty quick here. She wasn't sick or anything, but a dead person tells you that. You got to pay attention, right? So anyway, she at first was going to call her husband, but then she decided, no, probably not a good idea. I don't want to upset him, but I do need to tell my family what's going on. So she called her mom. Well, her mom didn't quite believe her. Her mom thought, you're probably dreaming, honey. That couldn't have happened. So just don't worry about it. I'm sure it was just a dream and you don't realize it. And she called her grandmother. Now, her grandmother, as you get older, paranormal experiences become more likely. Okay, the more years you put on, the more likely you're going to have one, or you're going to know somebody personally that had one. Okay, I don't think I've ever talked to an audience where somebody hasn't had a paranormal experience. They're common. Okay, so anyway, the grandma goes, "Whoa, you're scaring me. I'm coming there this weekend. I'm going to come down and we're going to talk. Okay, because this does worry me." So then she got off the phone with grandma and she sat down and she says, "Okay, what am I going to do about my husband?" So she sat down and she wrote a letter by hand, and she explained everything about being in the kitchen, about her sister showing up, and how she felt about it. Everything. She wrote it down. And at the end of the letter, she says, I want to know I love you, and you and our daughter have been the best thing that ever happened to me. And I just want you to know that. But I'm going somewhere, and I know where I'm going, and I'm looking forward to this. And I just want to let you know that before I go. She took it. So when he came home from work, she kept it hidden. And then when he went in to go to bed, she put it on the kitchen table and got into bed with him like she always did. Okay? Next day he wakes up, she's stone dead next to him. Turns out her pacemaker failed. She didn't die of any organic illness. Her pacemaker failed and she died. Okay? Now, these types of things happen quite often. I mentioned earlier that paranormal experiences are one of the evidences that our consciousness exists as an entity beyond its neural correlates. We are more, Watson and Crick, who came up with the DNA double helix. Well, Watson is now, Watson or Crick, one of them, I forgot which one. The one's still alive, I think it's Watson, okay? He's on this kick to say that you are nothing but the nerves in your brain. You're just your central nervous system, and there is no spirit, there's nothing beyond that. Well, I think that the evidence strongly suggests the opposite of that, and I'm going to go through some of those evidences. When you start talking about evidence of life after death, some people get really upset about it. They get out of shape because you can't prove these things. You can't test spirit material.
Because I do not believe in fairy tales about chakras or energy or the power of belief. There is no such thing as spirit. We are made of matter and nothing more. You're just another tiny, momentary speck within an indifferent universe.
You think too little of yourself.
According to Dr. Strange, there's no such thing as spirit. We are made of matter and nothing more. We are just a tiny, momentary speck within an indifferent universe. There is no designer up there. You're on your own. We are on our own. Compared to the rest of the universe, we are a speck that you can't even see. If you were to look at the whole box of the universe, you couldn't even make out you couldn't even make out our solar system if you looked at the whole thing, let alone our planet, our sun. We are meaningless. Compared to the mass of the universe and the splendor of it all, we are insignificant. Okay? And we're made of matter and nothing more. That represents the materialist, atheistic view of consciousness and mankind and reality. There is no God, there is no spirit. Now the theistic or the deistic view, which is the most common one, is that there is an intelligent designer up there. We have spirits, right? The spirits are separate from the body when the body dies. And then you have this agnostic New Age type view, which believes in spirits or spiritual energy, but questions the existence of a divine architect. The problem that the materialist atheists have is that life after death violates the materialistic worldview and is therefore contrary to science. They demand hard evidence. If you're going to talk about the spirit, then we need to study some spirit stuff. In order to say it's real, we need some type of testable stuff.
We all believe in the scientific method. I've dedicated my life to it. And we have actually done it. Today, at 4:32 p.m., we successfully trapped a Class 3 vapor.
You're telling me there's a ghost inside that thermos?
Don't touch it. Don't touch it.
Booyah. Emphasis on the boo.
Well, I would love to see that. I really would.
Now, we don't have spirit matter. I don't think we ever will. I could be wrong, but I just don't see that happening anytime soon. However, we do have indirect evidences that are so strong that I believe that we have a convincing argument that we do have a soul based on reason and logic. There are other things that we reason that are real, even though we don't have any samples of it. Dark matter and dark energy are believed to comprise the majority of the known universe. There's a bunch of it in our own galaxy, floating all around us. And yet, we don't have a single microgram to study. Not one microgram. But, indirectly, we have tons of evidence that this stuff exists. If you don't believe in dark matter, then you have to rewrite the laws of physics with regard to gravity. Okay? Indirect evidence is that human consciousness possesses power and presence beyond the limitations of the organic mind is what I'm going to be talking about. Indirect evidences. All right, and in demonstrating these indirect evidences, what I'm doing is I am suggesting against the materialist atheistic view. It kind of takes that apart. According to the materialist atheistic view, our minds, our consciousness arose through random processes taking place in the primordial oceans in this primordial soup, either near a hydrothermal vent or from a lightning strike or some form of energy got things going, and these little microscopic critters evolved into fish, and ultimately you have man with this brain that we have. The human brain as the most complex structure in the known universe. Ostensibly, it's the most complicated structure in the known universe. It is a pretty impressive piece of machinery, okay? Very impressive. 100 billion neurons, if you include the neocortex and cerebellum. Each neuron has between 7, and a healthy brain, between 7 and 10,000 synapses with other neurons. Whoa, that's a complexity that is huge. That's 100 trillion complexity numerically just for that. But in addition to that complexity, you have information being passed along with the microtubular system. And so that just gives you an order of complexity that is absolutely astounding. There's not a computer in the world that can compete with that kind of complexity. And it processes in parallel. It's an amazing machine. But according to the materialistic view, it came about all by itself. And that is all that we are. That is the complete book on our consciousness. Now what I'm going to do is present a working model of the mind based on the evidences that I'm about to present. Okay, so I want you to think about this model as I'm talking about these phenomena, so that you understand where I'm coming from. Okay, this is not the working model of the mind that you would hear about in psychiatry or psychology 101. All right, in this model, the brain is computer hardware. Okay, you got your random access memory, you got your hard drive, you got your power supply, you got your cooling system. It's hardware, and comprised of these billions of neurons, right? Consciousness, or your soul, or ego, or your spirit, is software that runs on the hardware of the brain. If there is a flaw in your computer hardware, then your software will not be expressed as it was designed. Okay, imagine you have a power surge on your laptop, and 3 of your memory banks are zapped, and you're down to 1 gigabyte of RAM. Imagine what Windows 8 is going to do with 1 gigabyte of RAM. You get the blue screen of death. Okay? Even though you don't have a virus in your software, it's working just fine, but you can't run Windows 8 on 1 gigabyte of RAM. Your hardware limits the expression of the software. As long as the brain is sufficiently viable, as long as it has enough juice, electrically if you will, as long as it has adequate juice, the spirit, your soul, your person, your ego, whatever you want to call it, your consciousness is slave to the organic brain. You get Alzheimer's? Guess what? Your consciousness is limited by that, and you're not going to remember stuff. Okay, you have schizophrenia, you're going to have some issues. You're going to have difficulties with reality testing and positive symptoms like hallucinations, delusions, disorganized thinking, and so forth. You have a stroke, you could learn the ability to speak and understand people. Your consciousness will endure those changes because it is slave to the organic brain. It's entangled with it. An example here, a patient who was an avid golfer. He used to be an executive for Blue Cross Blue Shield. And one night he's out on the golf course, one day rather, it was a very hot day, and he goes into the clubhouse to get himself something to drink. While he's in there, he wants to cool off a little bit, and he says, "Hey, is it okay if I turn the air conditioner down a little bit? I'm sweating here, you know?" They said, "Sure, go ahead." So he goes over, and he touches the air conditioner to turn it down, and at that very moment, the building is struck by dry lightning. It's not even raining outside, and the building gets hit by lightning. The bolt goes up his hand into his brain and zaps his right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. Okay? Now, right away, he doesn't notice the damage. He is blown across the room, splatting on top of the wall, and then plopping down to the floor. He gets up, brushes himself off. Whoa, get that thing fixed, right? Okay? But he doesn't feel any different. He feels so normal, if you will, that he goes home, doesn't even go to the hospital. Big mistake. Big mistake. When you have damage to your cerebral cortex, the damage itself is bad, but the inflammation that follows the damage is worse. That's why whenever there is brain damage from a bullet or whatever, you got to go on steroids to prevent the inflammation, because inflammation can cause swelling and herniation, which will kill you, or it can just, by being inflamed, you can end up destroying the neighboring tissue. And unfortunately for him, that's what happened. As he slept on it and woke up the next day, the longer he went, the more impaired that area became, to the point where he lost the ability to know what goes where. Where do you put the keys? In the keyhole. Oh, where do you put them again? Where do keys go? Where do you put the milk after you're done? The ventrolateral prefrontal cortex is the what part of your brain. What do I do with the steering wheel? What do I do with a letter? That's your ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. And he ended up going on disability. He couldn't do his job anymore. You talk to the guy, he's perfectly normal in every other area. He can maintain a normal conversation. It's just that area went down. So as long as he is stuck in his body, he is stuck with that impediment. Okay? Neurological damage will adversely express the software. It will adversely affect the expression of your software. Now, once that cortex, once the brain becomes isoelectric, no more juice, blood supply stopped, no sugar, no oxygen to the brain, then what happens is consciousness pops out of the drive bay and is free from the jail of the organic brain. And when people come out, according to near-death experiences, awareness goes up. So whatever impediments were present while they're in there are over. They come out, whatever problems they had while they're in the body, cognitively, those are over, and they have their full capacities, and then some. And we'll go into that a little bit later. But when that brain shuts down and there's no longer enough juice to hold the consciousness in the computer, consciousness flees. It is gone. It comes out as soon as this thing is not strong enough to hold it. Now, can we prove this model scientifically? Well, that's what I'm going to try to do, but through reason and logic, because, again, qualitative analysis of soul material is beyond us at this particular time. All right. Now, if materialism is true, if the materialistic view of consciousness, that we are simply a collection of macromolecules between our ears, if that's true, then certain observations don't make sense and should not happen. Number one, the materialistic self should not experience awareness of real events that are happening in places distant from the senses in time or space. In other words, paranormal activity, such as what I described with the patient whose sister showed up and said it's time to go, that sort of stuff shouldn't be happening. Okay? If all we are is meat between the ears that is electrical, then how does stuff like that happen? Okay? Here, a situation where an apparition appears. You can say, oh, it's a hallucination. A hallucination was able to predict your death, and then the death happens by a means that's not even, it wasn't even organic, it was the failure of your pacemaker. Time to go, boom. I mean, think about what would be necessary if there's meat between the ears, how do you have that kind of awareness? These sorts of things don't make sense. And there are other things. I'm going to talk about other examples as I go on here. Okay? Another thing that should not happen is that your consciousness, the activity between your ears, should not be able to influence matter outside of the body unless you're touching it, using some type of bodily influence. Right now, I should not be able to affect that chair right there. Okay? Yet, quantum mechanics says that I can. I'll talk about that a little bit here too. And then lastly, obviously, if consciousness is limited to the organic brain, then my consciousness obviously should not ever be able to leave my body. That doesn't make any sense at all. If all I am is electrical activity between the confines of my calvarium, then I should not be able to go woo, 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 and go visit some folks over here. That doesn't make any sense at all. Okay? All right, so those are three things that the materialistic self should not do. And I'm going to go and demonstrate that we violate all three of those things in reality. Okay? Starting with the first one. This is my weakest argument, the paranormal experiences, like the woman I just described to you. That's a paranormal experience. I'll give you one of my own. And again, I have a lot of these, and this was, when I wrote this talk, this was just the first one that popped into my head. A few years ago, my ex-mother-in-law called us up. We lived in Taylor, and they were in Livonia at the time. And she was frantic because she just had this dream. And she said, pray for Simon, something terrible's happening. What happened? And she had a dream that my brother-in-law, Sarmad, he was now, okay, they're all from Iraq, right? And they came to the United States and now living in Livonia. I said that, and we were living in Taylor. Well, Sarmad was still in Baghdad, okay? And last we heard, he had been drafted into the Iraqi army to fight in the Iran-Iraq war. Dude just graduated from medical school, and they're making him a medic on the front lines. That's like a death sentence, okay? And that's what we were worried about. So she calls us about falling off a horse and breaking his arm, and I'm going, if you're going to have a nightmare about it, it needs to be more realistic, like getting your head blown off with a cannon or something, okay? But a horse, that doesn't make any sense at all. Who's thinking about horses? Nobody, all right? So we let it go. We chalked it up to, that's your mom being superstitious, right? I'm not married anymore, obviously, so anyway. So what happened, again, a couple days later, he gives us a call. He's in Turkey, and he explained that the Kurdish people helped him escape through northern Iraq, through the mountains of Turkey on horseback. And guess what happened when he was on that horse? He fell off and broke his arm. All right? And it turns out that when he fell, it corresponded to the very time that Josephine had the dream about him falling off and breaking the arm. Now think about it. She's in Livonia, Michigan. He's in southern Turkey when this happens. And boom, she sees the event as it takes place. They can say, it's a lucky dream, if you can call it that. Now, your common sense would argue that. I don't even have to argue with that. It's like, seriously? You really think that was a coincidence? Does that really sound like a coincidence? It's hard to chalk that up. How many dreams have I had of people falling off and breaking their arms? None. Ever. Okay? That's not a common dream that people have. Okay? So, paranormal experiences are common. When I was in medical school, when I was in residency, when weird things like that would happen to a patient or myself, and I would tell other doctors, you know what they do? You think they go, whoa, man, that's just not very scientific. That stuff never happens. You know, there's got to be a logical explanation. Do you know how many people said that? None. You know why? Because as physicians, we treat lots of people, especially in psychiatry, and we hear these stories all the time. Okay? And when you get to know people, you know when people are off. I mean, especially in our field. I mean, we define crazy, right? I mean, I'll tell you if you're crazy. That's my field. That's what I do. Okay? We know when folks are crazy. Okay? I know psychotic. And you also know when people are sincere. And also, one of the things that you know is that people lie for a reason. Very rarely do people lie for nothing. Okay? In fact, I would say you never lie for nothing. You lie to make yourself look good. You lie to get out of trouble. You lie to get something that you want. You lie to not have something that you don't want, okay? You don't lie just for the sake of lying. And let me tell you this, you don't make yourself look weird, okay? If you want people to like you, okay? So a lot of folks that have paranormal experiences, they don't talk about it too much because you do look weird when you tell people what you found out. But these things, again, are common. All right, now, this second one. Influencing matter outside the body unless it uses bodily contact. Now, I am not talking about telekinesis. I have not come across any evidence at all that telekinesis is even possible. Some people are really big into that. I know it's a lot of TV shows and stuff. I haven't seen any evidence that we can do telekinesis. None. Okay? Now, if I find some, I'll let you know, but I don't know of any examples of that. However, quantum mechanics tells us that our consciousness, our mind, our soul, whatever you want to call it, has the ability to make matter real. I think, what does that mean?
The universe is such a strange place.
The universe is a strange place. Quantum mechanics says that your mind has the ability to make the atoms that make up the matter in your world. They can't decide where they want to be or what their properties should be. And they exist as some type of quantum probability field called a wave function. Okay? It exists only as information till you look at it. Once you look at it, boom, it collapses into actual matter. So prior to looking at it, it exists as a wave function, which means all the possible places where that atom can be exist in superposition, but not in any one definite place. So it's like, and you turn around, it congeals into matter because you looked at it. And that sounds crazy. It does. And when it was discovered back in the 1920s, people thought it was crazy. Niels Bohr said, anyone who's not shocked by quantum theory has not understood it. Now, there are several things that quantum theory says that are out there, but this is one of the most proven theories in all of physics, but this is one of them. Prior to measurement or observation, objects have no defined properties or location. The act of a conscious observer creates the existence of the physical objects and the properties they entail instantly. You guys weren't there. That screen behind me would exist as a probability wave. It would be a wave function. It wouldn't be solid until I turn around and boom, it becomes solid. But you're looking at it, so you're making it solid for me, so I don't have to worry about it disappearing, right? Because you're looking at it. All right? That's what quantum theory is saying. Now, to help understand it, to help you understand better, I have a little cartoon. Some of you have already seen it, but it's important because it explains the strength of this. It explains why we can't discount this. Say, well, that's just some crazy theory. I'm sure there's somebody that disagrees with it somewhere. You can't, because they've tried. It was discovered in the 1920s, and it has been tested over and over again. It's one of the most tested and supported theories in all of physics. All right? So I'm going to just show you this little quick cartoon, and it's produced so that people with a non-physics background can understand how strong the evidence is that what I just said is actually true.
An electron is a tiny, tiny bit of matter, like a tiny marble. Let's fire a stream through one slit. It behaves just like the marble, a single band. So, if we shoot these tiny bits through two slits, we should get like the marbles, two bands. What? An interference pattern. We fired electrons, tiny bits of matter through. But we get a pattern like waves, not like little marbles. How? How could pieces of matter create an interference pattern like a wave? It doesn't make sense. But physicists are clever. They thought, maybe those little balls are bouncing off each other and creating that pattern. So, they decide to shoot electrons through one at a time. There is no way they could interfere with each other. But after an hour of this, the same interference pattern is seen to emerge. The conclusion is inescapable. The single electron leaves as a particle, becomes a wave of potentials, goes through both slits, and interferes with itself to hit the wall like a particle. But mathematically, it's even stranger. It goes through both slits, and it goes through neither. And it goes through just one, and it goes through just the other. All of these possibilities are in superposition with each other. But physicists were completely baffled by this. So they decided to peek and see which slit it actually goes through. They put a measuring device by one slit to see which one it went through and let it fly. But the quantum world is far more mysterious than they could have imagined. When they observed, the electron went back to behaving like a little marble. It produced a pattern of two bands, not an interference pattern of many. The very act of measuring or observing which slit it went through meant it only went through one, not both. The electron decided to act differently, as though it was aware it was being watched. The observer collapsed the wave function simply by observing.
So just to summarize what he was talking about here is that if nobody is looking, then what happens is the electrons approach the double slit as a wave, and you end up with an interference pattern if nobody's looking. If you look, if you measure, if you watch each electron as it's going through here, then it behaves like it's purely matter. Now, what is this wave? A wave of potentialities. It's every possible configuration that it could have exists in this wave. And so when you look at it, though, somehow, and this is called the quantum enigma. It's a huge puzzle. Somehow, your observing it forces the matter to decide, hey, I'm going to be in one location and have these specific properties because I have an audience. Somebody is watching. And it has to be something conscious like you. Bacteria and viruses, they're in the neighborhood, they don't count. Okay? So your consciousness is required. Now think about that. The conclusion is drawn here that the very act of observing caused the wave function to collapse and create the existence of matter. That's amazing. Think about it. If your brain, if your consciousness is simply a collection of neurons in your head, then why is it that that chunk of meat has the ability to collapse the matter in the outside world into reality? You make the matter decide to coalesce and to be matter. Otherwise, it stays as information. It remains as this quantum probability wave. All right. Independent of observation, particles exist in a state of a wave function, a series of potentialities rather than actual objects. Matter doesn't exist independent of a conscious observer. Now, if this is the first time you're hearing that, you go, that sounds crazy. Well, Einstein thought so too, and spent a lot of time trying to disprove it. He couldn't. And in fact, every investigator who's looked into this, there has not been one experiment that quantum mechanics has failed. It has predicted every single one. So it's difficult to argue with this. If nobody's looking, the farm exists as a wave function. Anton Zeilinger is a Nobel Prize winner for his work in quantum mechanics, and he says we have to give up the idea of realism to a far greater extent than most physicists believe today. What is realism? Realism is the belief that things are real even when I'm not looking. Realism says that if nobody was on the earth except you, then when you turn your back on the moon no longer exists in matter form. It requires you, for the atoms of that moon, to decide to become real, decide to have the properties that it has. Now, again, it sounds bizarre, but if anybody can disprove it, if anybody can prove realism on any level, it's called the Quantum Randy Challenge. You have an instant Nobel Prize. Okay? That's how strong this is. All right, there it is. Nobel Prize. So if anybody would want to go for a Nobel Prize, all you got to do is prove that things are real when you're not looking at them. Your consciousness or your soul has the ability to turn quantum waves into matter. Now think about it. If the universe is cold and impersonal, okay, no God, no higher power, the universe just evolved you by accident, okay? If that's true, think about it. So you accidentally develop these very impressive, complicated bodies. And then you develop a soul that's separate from the body, but quantumly entangled as long as you're alive. And this soul, this consciousness, is so powerful that the matter of that indifferent universe, it can't be real unless your soul is looking at it. Now, that doesn't make any sense. It almost sounds contradictory. Okay? I mean, it makes more sense that the universe was created with us in mind, because we play a pretty intricate role in making the matter of that universe real. Okay? Is it reasonable to you that a piece of randomly formed meat would have such an ability? Okay, the next thing that the materialistic self should not be able to do is separate from the body and have awareness of places distant from the body.
Hey, so I wanted to make a YouTube video just kind of to share something that happened with me when I was younger. This is going back all the way in 2010. So in 2010, I was at this party. And to kind of make a long story short, I had a near-death experience. What happened was on February 20th, 2010, I was at this party, regular party, and basically one thing led to another, and I ended up dying at this party. I had a seizure in the kitchen. My version of what happened was I was standing in the hallway, and I saw, yellow caution tape right in the kitchen. So I look, and I'm like, what is going on? Why is there yellow caution tape? So I walk down the hall into the kitchen, and I see like this big group of people standing there, and then they're all in a circle. I'm like, what are they looking at? Like, what's going on? So I look down into the circle, and I'm at a party. I'm supposed to be, having a good time, but like there's now caution tape, and I'm like, what is going on? I look down into the circle, and I'm in the middle of the circle, and everybody's staring at me, and my body is laying on the ground. And then I am like, whoa. So I try to like maybe communicate with people, or no one can really hear me. I look down, my body's not there, like I have no body. And I'm just like, what is going on? Like this is just crazy. So like I'm kind of scared. Well, not scared, but I'm like, okay, obviously I died. I just knew at that moment, like, nobody can hear me. I'm not supposed to be here anymore. So in that second I realized, okay, I'm dead. I look up. All of a sudden in the kitchen, I see this like huge white light coming from the ceiling to the floor. And it's just like, boom. And it's right there, and I just knew, like, okay, that's home. Like, that's where I'm supposed to go. So I had nowhere really else to go. No one was talking to me. I had no body, so I just, like, naturally moved into the light.
The only thing I remember is I started seeing the light, and started walking towards the light.
I let go. And as soon as I chose to let go, that's when I was embraced by this incredible light in this tunnel that propelled me at an incredible force. It was so powerful and so magnificent, so loving. I've never ever felt this kind of love before, and it's really a challenge to put in words to describe the magnitude of the love and the embrace that I felt in this tunnel.
So I went into the light, and as I was moving up into the light, I just started to feel so good. You know, like words can't explain it. Like, the higher that I went into the light, and the more that I moved up and further away from Earth, the better I felt. And the feeling of pleasure does not really apply to this Earth. Like, nothing can compare. Like, if you took everything that you were in favor of, like maybe getting a massage in a hot tub, your favorite music, your favorite food, your favorite drink, everything that you love happening to you all at once, no matter what it is, all at once, it would not even closely compare to the pleasure that was just within that light. And as you moved further into, like, further away from this Earth, the pleasure felt even better. So you just moved up, it felt better and better. It was insane.
Now, the question is, these are very common experiences, and these are things that people have in common. Everybody's near-death experience is a little bit different, but the experience of the tunnel and the light and the feeling that people have in that light and the feeling that they have when they meet with God and all that stuff, those are pretty common, and these are like very consistent stories from one person to the next. But the question is it real? Because the other side, you know, whenever you see a television special on near-death experiences, they always present, well, you know, the dying brain, the oxygen is leaving the brain, and as it goes away, you see this light, and that's just a sign that you're going off into oblivion. And that whole dream, that experience is something through evolution that has come about to make your death an easier thing to bear. And so that's just, it's a common dream that happens. But it's all in your head. It's not real. Now, I would say that the specifics, the things that they have in common, I mean, there's such a thing as a shared delusion. I can tell you a lot of stories about shared delusions. There isn't such thing as a shared hallucination, though. Okay, so the fact that there's so many similarities suggests that there's something more to this than just a hallucination of some type. If it's a hallucination, I would expect a lot more subjectivity to this, but there are a lot of specific things that they describe that they have in common with one another. Okay? But there's something stronger than that, because if that's all we had, I would say, you know, the other side has some good points. It can go either way. If that's all we have more. Okay? Veridical perception. Several cases quite a few cases now of veridical perception are out there. Okay, and I'm going to tell you one with my own patient here. But when veridical perception is happening, these are cases when people have near-death experiences. They're floated out of their bodies. They're dead over here. They float out of their bodies. They think of a loved one. And the instant they think of them, boom, they're with them. And they are able to then accurately describe what they were wearing, what they were doing, and they can describe their conversations. Right? And we've got many, many examples. And there is a book that I recommend called The Self Never Dies. It's just a collection of, these are stories of veridical perception that have been documented in the medical literature by medical professionals. So this is not, you know, not like your Weekly World News where some unnamed person, some unnamed state, you know, had some experience and you have no idea when it happened, who it happened to, who was a witness. You have none of that information. This book basically is a description of specific people in the medical literature documented by medical professionals. So there are a lot of examples of this, and I'm going to just describe mine here. I have a thing on YouTube called Evidence of the Afterlife Veridical Perception, where I talk about some of the things I'm going to talk about today, but go into a little bit more detail than I'm going to be going through tonight. All right, this was one of my first patients. She was my introduction to veridical perception. I didn't know that veridical perception was a thing back in those days, okay? I did not know that this stuff was even real back in those days. And she was my education. I was treating Millie for panic disorder. She was one of my long-term therapy cases. And Millie had a rough childhood. Her mom was very irresponsible. And as a result, Millie ended up getting hurt beyond what should happen to a child. Okay? So she developed panic disorder because of all the consequences of a bad life. Okay? Especially as a child. Just freedoms that should be given to children, and they can get hurt, and she got hurt. So she had panic disorder. She was very ashamed of her mental illness. She didn't want anybody to know. Now, when she'd go out in public, start to have a panic attack, she would break her neck trying to get home because home was safe, right? Well, occasionally she'd go on dates, and often when she went on dates, she wouldn't have a panic attack and everything would be fine. However, when she was on a date, if she started having a panic attack, she would insist to her date that he take her home. If he didn't take her home, she became quite verbally abusive to him. She would make him take her home. Well, that usually worked, but she was out with one gentleman, Fred, and Fred wasn't interested in ending the date so quickly. He thought it was going well, and when she changed her tune and said, "Take me home now," he's like, "I didn't do anything wrong. I don't deserve this. You're just a little nervous. And when I'm nervous, I drink alcohol." So he decided instead to go home like she demanded, he went to a party store. He made the mistake of leaving the keys in his car and walking in front of the vehicle. She jumped behind the wheel and ran him over, blip, blip, and kept going. She got about a mile or two away before she realized the gravity of what she had done. And the thought, hit and run, kept going through her head. And she realized, hit and run, that's penitentiary time. That's not jail. That's prison. And that frightened her. That cleared her nose, and the panic attack went away, replaced by real anxiety. And so she came up with a plan. She stopped at a payphone. She decided, if I stop at a payphone and call for help, then it's not hit and run, it's hit and went for help. That's not so bad. So she goes to the payphone, she calls 911, she explains that somebody's been hit. She does it anonymously, of course. She explained where he was at the party store, at the intersection. She described what he was wearing and so forth, told him to hurry up, and then she was done. Her intention was to drive home after that, but she couldn't relax. She had to know, is he alive or dead? Did I kill him or not? Did I kill him or not? So she drove back to where she had run him down, and when she got there, EMS was already putting him in the ambulance. So she followed the ambulance to the hospital and waited in the hospital parking lot for about an hour before she got the courage to go in. When she found out he was in intensive care, she goes to the intensive care wing, and when she gets there, she looks over in the far left-hand booth and sees Fred laying there. He opens his eyes, and as soon as he sees her, he takes his hand and motions for her to come over. So she goes over there, and on her way over, she's trying to think of how she's going to talk him out of pressing charges. So when she gets there, first thing he says is, "I saw you." She's like, what do you mean you saw me? He says, "When you ran over me, it didn't even hurt. I felt pressure. Like when you ran over me, I felt pressure, like toothpaste. I squirted out of my body. Next thing I know, I was standing up, looking down at my own self, laying on the pavement there." Okay, and I remember thinking to myself, whoa, this is for real. This happened to my uncle. My uncle had an out-of-body experience like this, and he told me about it, and I didn't believe him. And here I am, having the same thing. Cool. And then I thought of you. I thought to myself, why did you run over me? What is wrong with you? Nothing. We didn't even have a fight. What is going on? And the minute he thought of her, he was in the car with her. And she goes, "You were not." He goes, "Yes, I was." And Millie said, "No, you weren't. I was in the car and you weren't there." And then he goes, "Oh, yeah?" And he quoted her 911 conversation word for word. Now, when Millie's telling the story, it wasn't out of pride that she had this supernatural experience. She wasn't writing a book or trying to get famous or trying to get sympathy from me or anything like that. It bothered her. It freaked her out that dead people could watch her. And that she was paranoid already, and this added to her paranoia. It frightened her. In fact, even telling the story, she got shaky just telling me the story because it scared her. All right? Now, this is an example of veridical perception. When a person has a near-death experience, comes out of their body, and are able to see things and describe things. This guy was 2 miles down the road. There's no way he could have overheard or even seen her making that 911 call. All right. So this is in order to say that that this didn't really happen, that the soul didn't really come out of the body. You have to believe in a conspiratorial world where people lie for no reason. Okay. Self Does Not Die contains about 100 such cases. I'm going to talk about a couple more here. John Lerma tells of a patient of his, Ricardo. Ricardo had a couple of heart attacks He went to San Antonio Hospital after having a heart attack after dinner one night. He had to be cardioverted a few times. After his first cardioversion, he told the doctor that he was out of his body and saw a bright light. He described it as a roller coaster ride. Then he said, I don't know what was happening except that I was flying over my body and angels began to show me things I had done in my life. Now that life review happens almost more often than not. It's a very common experience where you see your whole life from the time you were born up until you crossed over. And you see it from God's perspective. Okay? Anyway, he saw all these things. With an elated smile, he said, it was so beautiful. God and the angels told me I would survive this. Well, I had a lot of realizations during that time. I guess you can say I negotiated with God to make things right with my family. I was abusive with my family and friends. And God gave me the opportunity to mend things with my wife. And that's a very common thing. When you see your life review, the purpose of it is, nobody comes away from the life review and says, I lived a perfect life. Man, thank you, God, for showing me that wonderful movie. It's usually, you look at that and you go, man, I got some work to do. Okay? The things that you do out of the goodness of your heart, because you really genuinely care for others, the selfless things that you do, the acts of affection and love that you do, not to get paid, but because it's the right thing or because you want good for others, you can sense His pleasure. You go, yeah, the things that you do to grow your relationship with God. And you get a thumbs up for that. The things that we do out of selfishness, greed, lust, anger, revenge, you don't want to see that stuff. And you see it for what it is. And one of the things people come back with when they go through that life review is an understanding that relationships are what it's about. My particular view of the universe is that we exist in this matrix. The matrix exists so that you can enact your free will. When you use your free will to grow your relationship with God, to demonstrate love to others, to use your gift, to be a blessing to others, when you do that, you experience fulfillment. You get to get a sense of your purpose. That's why we're here. Okay, that's just my little commentary on it. But I've seen so many of these cases. So when you talk about the life review, very, very common experience. Let me go on. All right. I was abusive with my family and friends. God gave me the opportunity to mend things with my wife. Now, this is where it stops being a normal near-death experience and now becomes a case of veridical perception. He says to the doctor, Dr. Lerm, I need your help. I know you doubt my story, and in a way, so do I. That's why I need confirmation on whether this spiritual occurrence was real. When I was out of my body and floating up above the trauma room, I spotted a 1985 quarter lying on the right-hand side of the cardiac monitor. You want to check that for me? Dr. Lerma did, and what do you think he found on top of the 7-foot cardiac monitor? A dusty 1985 quarter on the right-hand side. Okay? Hadn't been disturbed in months because it was covered in dust. But that was a very specific thing, an example of veridical perception. Here's a guy that came in. He was horizontal when he came in. The guy didn't stand up once before he told this story to the doctor. Is there another explanation? Yeah, sure. One of the staff may have stood on a stool, discovered the thing, whispered it in his ear. You can't disprove that. It's just, this is where you got to turn on your common sense here. Here's another case by Dr. Norma Bowe. She describes a case who was in a coma. She had been in a coma for several weeks, had to be resuscitated 4 to 5 times. She later reported that when her heart had stopped, she came floating out of her body, and she described how she was floating up and looking down into the room. Now, this woman was into numbers. She was very obsessive about numbers. Okay, when she saw a number, she had to think about it. She had to memorize it. So while she was out of her body, she maintained that particular trait. So she looked down on top of the respirator and saw that the respirator had a 12-digit serial number. Well, while she was out of her body, she memorized that 12-digit serial number. So she wakes up out of her coma and starts talking to the medical staff, and she quoted all 12 digits of that serial number, and she was accurate to 12 digits. Okay? These are, again, examples of veridical perception. Now, the first big case of veridical perception was documented from a migrant, it was a case involving a migrant worker named Maria in Harborview Medical Center in Seattle. And I have a little video here to describe that particular case.
I was not brought up to believe something like this. This wasn't The closest I got to anything like this was maybe as a child hearing fairy tales. In fact, my parents to this day think that I'm committing career suicide to even be in this, except that my career has flourished. So.
On the other hand, there are those in medical circles who regard Kim Sharp as one of the world's most astute authorities on near-death experiences. Aside from her traditional medical career, she is head of the Northwest chapter of the International Association of Near-Death Studies. Since the day she first saw the worn tennis shoe, she has recounted and recorded the near-death experiences of hundreds of patients who have gone beyond the brink of life and returned to tell incredible stories. But to this day, she remains most deeply affected by the story of a woman who had double cardiac arrest and returned to life in the intensive care ward of Harborview Hospital. The woman was a migrant worker named Maria. It was April 1976.
She had come to the big city for the first time, to the city of Seattle, had a massive heart attack.
As doctors fought to save Maria, her heart stopped for several minutes. It was a near miracle in itself that the doctors brought her back.
What she told me was that when she calmed down, was that during her resuscitation, she had found herself at the ceiling level, and she pointed to the corner of the ceiling, where she could look down and observe her own resuscitation.
And then she told Kim Sharp the story of the old shoe.
She felt like she was about 3 stories above the ground, and she is looking at a tennis shoe that's sitting on a ledge. She said the tennis shoe was dark blue, very worn, that there was a scruff placed by the little toe, and that she saw the lace going under the heel. And the reason she was agitated, the reason that she wanted to see somebody, is because she wanted someone to get the shoe.
There was no shoe on the ledge outside of Maria's window, but Kim Sharp was curious enough to look further.
So I start going from room to room to room, looking down on the ledges, so that I can go back to Maria and tell her that I have really done a thorough search.
But on the opposite side of the hospital, on a different floor altogether, Kim Sharp saw something.
I walked into one room, and this is such a vivid memory for me, because I remember the window. I remember walking to the window getting closer to me. The view was to the west. I had looked in many windows by this point and not seen anything. I looked down, and to my shock, my utter shock, there was a tennis shoe. It was dark blue. It was beat up. Now, from my perspective, looking down, I couldn't see the little toe area. The little toe area was on the outside of the building, not towards the building at all. I could see the tip of the lace coming out from under the heel. I had to presume that someplace on the outside of the shoe, there was a continuum. There was a lace that indeed went under the shoe in order for me to see what was coming out. I could not believe my eyes. I opened the window and reached down and plucked out the shoe.
Maria's description of the shoe had been accurate to the last intricate detail, all the way down to the scuffed area of the left toe. There were no other buildings on that side of the hospital. Such details on the outer rim of the shoe could not be seen from anywhere on the ground or from anywhere inside the hospital.
I took the shoe. I went back to Maria, but I put it behind my back, and then I brought the shoe around and showed her. And we both began to cry and hug, and it was a very emotional moment. It was like a miracle had happened, and I had the privilege of being a part of this.
Okay. Now this story is very old. It's like from 1973, I believe. And it's been around for a while, and was one of the first cases of veridical perception. So when people would discuss, evidence for the afterlife, this one got used a lot. Well, the atheists got a hold of the story, and they poo-pooed it as not such a big deal. But they did it by distorting the story and minimizing it. I think I have an example here of, this Christopher Hitchens doing that very thing here.
This too, and the most persuasive example from any hospital he's found, and I get it all the time, is a woman who floated out of her body, out of the bed, made a tour of the outside of the hospital,
saw the shoe.
Noticed that there was a running shoe on one of the windowsills, woke up, reported it to a nurse whose name we've never been told, and who went and looked, and there was the shoe. Now, if that doesn't prove it, I don't know what does. I could hardly be more reassured if I'd been told that it was able to reunite it with its missing pair. NDE is bullshit. It doesn't count. It's not coming back from the dead, nor is it an account of what happens to you when you're gone. It's what can happen to you with the help of life-preserving scientific medicine while you are still alive.
So notice he minimized the story by saying, you know what? The whole story, for one thing, he implies it's an urban legend. You know, there's some nurse, we don't know her name, you know, we don't know the name of the person, we don't know the name of the nurse, who discovered it. So it's just what happened was she popped out of her body, saw a shoe on the ledge, they checked it, sure enough there was a shoe there. Now if that was all we had, then that's a goofy story. I mean, because, you know, sometimes people throw shoes out windows. I mean, what are the chances? It's not that big a deal. The reality, however, is that Maria gave a very specific description of the shoe that she saw. Okay? Now, for one thing, this shoe that she described was was kind of rare, actually. And when they went to do the reenactment for this little video clip, they couldn't find that shoe anywhere. They used the Converse All-Star. The original shoe was a Nike. They couldn't find a navy blue Nike shoe. Okay, so here are the specifics. She described it as a man's tennis shoe. First, it's a tennis shoe, not just a shoe. She knew it was a tennis shoe. She knew it was a man's shoe. Okay, so she got that right. It was the left shoe as opposed to the right shoe. She got the brand. The brand, said there was a Nike logo near the heel, so it wasn't a Converse the way you saw it. They couldn't find a shoe to put in the movie because that's how hard it was to find that kind of shoe. It was a dark blue as opposed to white or black or anything. It was well worn as opposed to newer. There was a large scuff on the left side where the little toe would go, and the shoelace was caught under the heel of the shoe. And the scuffed mark could only be seen from a perspective outside and above the window. Now, those are very specific elements. See, that wasn't discussed. Also, it wasn't some random nurse that nobody knows the name of it. It's Kimberly Clark Sharp. I mean, everybody, all you had to do was Google it and he would have learned more. Okay, but he didn't bother. He just minimized it and brushed it aside. So that's called a straw man, where you make our argument look foolish by reciting what it is, and he didn't recite what the argument was. If he'd included all of that, his argument would have looked rather stupid. Okay, these are very specific things. So, near-death experiences are extremely common, but when they occur with veridical perception, you can't just toss them aside. Okay? I mean, there aren't an infinite number of possible things. Either people are lying, and we live in a conspiratorial world. Doctors are lying, patients' friends are lying. You know. Now, another trick they go is, well, it's just a bunch of mistakes. You know, I mean, actually, they really heard this information. Millie or Fred, you know, he actually, when he was laying there on the pavement, he actually had a pair of binoculars in his pocket, and he found Millie 2 miles away, saw her in the thing, and said, I'm gonna get even with her, running me over. I'm gonna tell her that I saw her. Okay, that's gonna be hilarious. Yeah, okay, those things we can't entirely exclude, but it's kind of outside the bounds of common sense. Okay, that's just, you know, seriously, that's just nonsense. Okay? Alright, paranormal experiences are common. The matter in the universe decides to be real when our souls, our consciousness takes a look at it, and then it collapses into reality, and then the atoms in the world you exist decide where to be and what their properties should be. And out-of-body experiences are common in near-death experiences, and they give objective evidence that your soul comes apart from the body and exists apart from the body and has awareness independent of the organic brain. Okay? Ergo, we do have a soul that survives the death of the body, and the evidence is not small. Now, we can't take a piece of it, we can't do qualitative analysis, but based on these things really go against the materialistic view that we are nothing more than a collection of neurons. There is more to consciousness than we ever would have imagined from an atheistic perspective. Okay. Any questions? Yeah?
The Kimberly Clark Sharp?
Yeah.
I believe it was April 1976.
Oh, 76? Okay, I said 72. Okay, thank
72.
you. Yes. Yep, thank you for that. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much then. All set. The self does not die. If you want to, again, it's like 100 cases. If you want to just read through them, it's easy reading. It just goes through one after the other. And these are cases that are documented in the medical literature of the veridical perception.